A porcelain cup shatters in the darkness of a restaurant storage room at dawn, and with it, the illusion of safety for a young woman who made the fatal mistake of being in the wrong place while wearing the wrong skin. Within hours, handcuffs will close around innocent wrists, a phone call between childhood friends will seal a fate neither can imagine, and a single decision made out of fear and loyalty will set in motion a reckoning that will destroy careers, end friendships, and reveal the devastating cost of choosing comfort over courage. What no one in that small Alabama town knows, not the restaurant owner desperately protecting his family legacy, not the police officer torn between duty and friendship, not the customers who watch in silent approval, is that the quiet young waitress being accused carries a letter in her pocket with a signature powerful enough to bring their entire world crashing down. Some tests reveal who we truly are when we think no one important is watching. Some mistakes can never be taken back. And some silences scream louder than any words ever could. This is a story about the moment when ordinary people face extraordinary choices, when the easy path leads to destruction, and when the truth hidden in the shadows finally demands to be seen. Subscribe to hear stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. Follow us to never miss a moment, and comment below to tell us where you're watching from, because this story will stay with you long after the final word. The sound came first, sharp, final, like a small life ending in the dark. A porcelain cup meeting concrete floor at 4:47 a.m., shattering into pieces too many to count. Cold coffee splashed across forgotten invoices, and health inspection reports stacked carelessly in the corner of the storage room. And there, in that dim space that smelled of grease and old potatoes, sat a young black woman with her back against the metal shelving, her hands trembling so violently she couldn't have held anything even if she'd wanted to. Amelia Washington didn't make a sound beyond that broken cup. No sob escaped her lips, no cry for help. Just silent tears carving clean paths down cheeks, still marked with yesterday's exhaustion. Her white apron, the one she'd ironed so carefully the night before, the one she'd hoped would make her look professional, competent, trustworthy, was now stained with coffee and something darker, something that looked almost like defeat. But if you looked closer, if you really studied her eyes in that yellow half-light filtering under the storage room door, you'd see something else entirely. Something that looked like patience, like someone waiting for a trap to spring. Outside that door in the main dining room of Billy's place, the fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous morning song. This restaurant sat on the edge of Millbrook, Alabama, a town so small it didn't appear on most maps, where everyone knew everyone's business by breakfast and forgot it by supper, only to remember it all again the next day. The kind of place where a man's handshake still meant something, where Sunday church wasn't optional, and where certain people knew their place without anyone having to say it out loud. Graham Keller stood before the antique mirror he'd salvaged from his grandmother's estate, the one with the gilded frame that made him feel like the success story he told himself he was. At 42, Graham had that particular look of a man who'd peaked in high school and spent every day since trying to recapture that glory, broad shoulders that were just starting to soften, a beard trimmed with the precision of someone who cared deeply about appearances, and eyes that never quite met their own reflection for too long. Clean place, fast service, happy customers, he repeated to himself, his Alabama drawl thick as molasses in the empty restaurant. Nothing can go wrong today. Nothing can go wrong. He'd been saying this every morning for 3 weeks now, ever since the Regional Restaurant Association announced their annual inspection tour. Billy's place had been in his family for 37 years, passed down from his father, who'd received it from his father before him. Graham would die before he let it fail on his watch. He adjusted his collar, practiced his welcoming smile, the one that showed just enough teeth to seem friendly, but not so many that it looked desperate, and told himself he had everything under control. 15 miles away, across county lines, Officer Tyler Birch sat in his patrol car outside the Millbrook police station, staring at a photograph he kept tucked behind his badge. The edges were worn soft from too much handling, the colors faded like an old wound that refused to fully heal. In it, 2 boys grinned at the camera, maybe 6 years old, gap-toothed and sunburned, arms slung around each other's shoulders outside the very same Billy's place that existed today. Tyler and Graham, best friends since before memory, since before either of them understood that the world had already decided so many things about who they'd become, and what they'd be willing to do to stay comfortable. Tyler was 39 now, with the kind of face that made people trust him automatically. Honest, open, with laugh lines that suggested someone who chose kindness when he could. But there were other lines too, deeper ones around his mouth, the kind that come from swallowing words you know you should say but don't. He poured the last of his gas station coffee down his throat, grimacing at the bitterness, and adjusted the weight of his service weapon on his hip. It always felt heavier in the morning, before he'd convinced himself of whatever he'd have to convince himself of that day. He had no idea, no possible way of knowing, that in approximately 2 hours and 14 minutes, his phone would ring. That Graham's voice would come through tight with panic and certainty, that he'd be asked to make a choice that would reveal exactly who he'd become in all the years since that photograph was taken. Billy's place opened at 6 a.m. sharp, just like it had every day since 1986. The early crowd was sparse, a handful of truckers passing through, old Mr. Henderson who came in for the senior discount breakfast special, and Margaret Whitfield, the elementary school principal who liked her coffee black and her eggs over easy. The morning light came through the window soft and golden, catching dust motes that danced in the air like tiny, indifferent witnesses to everything about to unfold. Amelia had cleaned herself up by then. She'd emerged from that storage room with her face washed, her apron straightened, and something in her posture that suggested a soldier reporting for duty rather than a waitress showing up for her third shift. She'd been hired exactly 5 days ago, a Thursday afternoon when Graham was desperate for staff after his previous waitress quit without notice. She'd walked in with a resume that listed experience in Birmingham and Montgomery, with references that checked out, with a smile that seemed genuine enough, and a quietness that Graham had mistaken for submission. She moved through the dining room like a ghost, efficient and nearly invisible, refilling coffee cups before they emptied, delivering meals with a soft, "Here you are, sir," or "Enjoy, ma'am," that never invited conversation. She avoided eye contact not out of shyness, but with the precision of someone who'd learned exactly how much attention to invite and how much to deflect. The other staff, 2 older white women who'd worked there for years, watched her with that particular suspicion reserved for anyone new, anyone different, anyone who might upset the delicate ecosystem of their small-town routine. At 8:23 a.m., everything changed, though the change itself was so small that most people missed it entirely. Robert Caldwell walked in, 63 years old, owner of Caldwell Farms, which employed half the county during harvest season. A man whose opinion could make or break a business, whose handshake opened doors, whose displeasure could close them just as fast. He ordered the usual: biscuits and gravy, bacon crispy, sweet tea so sweet you could feel your teeth ache. Amelia took his order with her customary quiet efficiency. He barely glanced at her. When he paid, using a worn leather wallet that was older than Amelia, something fell. It hit the floor with barely a sound, that soft thud of leather on linoleum. Amelia saw it fall. She watched it slide partially under the booth. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, her eyes moving briefly to where Graham stood at the register, then back to Mr. Caldwell's retreating back. She didn't pick it up. She didn't call out. She simply returned to the kitchen with empty plates stacked high on her tray. 27 minutes later, Robert Caldwell came storming back through the door, his face red, his voice loud enough to silence every conversation in the restaurant. "My wallet," he announced to the room at large, as if the room itself had stolen it, "had $400 cash in it, for payroll. $400. The search began immediately, Graham and the staff looking under tables, between booth cushions, in the trash cans. Nothing. Robert Caldwell stood in the center of it all, like an Old Testament prophet declaring judgment, his presence alone an accusation. The other customers watched with that peculiar mixture of sympathy and entertainment that comes when someone else's crisis interrupts your breakfast. Graham's mind was already racing, already calculating, already arriving at the conclusion he needed to arrive at. Only one new person. Only one person nobody really knew. Only one person who'd been near that booth, who'd served that table, who'd had opportunity, and in Graham's rapidly narrowing worldview, motive. The math was simple. The logic was airtight. The prejudice was invisible to everyone who shared it. "Amelia," Graham called out, his voice carrying across the restaurant with an authority that surprised even him. "Come here, please." She emerged from the kitchen slowly, her face carefully neutral, and something about that neutrality, made Graham even more certain. Innocent people protested. Innocent people showed emotion. This calm. This was the calm of someone who'd been caught and knew it. "Empty your pockets," he said. Not a question, a command. The restaurant fell silent, except for the eternal hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of something cooking on the grill. Amelia stood very still for a long moment, and in that moment, something passed across her face. Not fear, not shame, but something that looked almost like recognition, as if this was a scene she'd rehearsed, a test she'd been preparing for, a moment she'd known would come. "I don't have anything that isn't mine," she said quietly, but she reached into her apron pocket anyway. Out came a pen, a small notepad, a folded tissue. Her jeans pockets, house keys, a few coins, and a letter, carefully folded, the paper quality suggesting something official, something important. "What's that?" Graham pointed to the letter. "Personal," Amelia replied, and for the first time, there was something harder in her voice. Nothing to do with any wallet, but Graham's face had already settled into certainty. He looked around the restaurant, at Robert Caldwell, at the watching customers, at his legacy hanging in the balance. "I think we need to call the police," he announced, "for everyone's protection, to do this properly." "I didn't take anything," Amelia said, and her voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it now, something that sounded like pity. "Then you won't mind if we make it official," Graham replied, already reaching for his phone. His finger hovered over Tyler's number, the one he'd had memorized since they were kids, since before phones had names attached to numbers. "Mr. Keller," Amelia said, and the way she said his name made him pause. "Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do?" It wasn't a plea. It wasn't begging. It was a genuine question, asked with the tone of someone offering a last chance before a door closed forever. Graham looked at her, really looked at her for maybe the first time since she'd been hired, saw something in her eyes that made his finger hesitate over that call button, but then he glanced back at Robert Caldwell, at the other customers, at everything he stood to lose, and the hesitation passed. "Tyler," he said into the phone, "it's Graham. I need you at Billy's place, now. We've got a situation." In the storage room, in the place where the cup had broken just hours before, a single coffee stain was slowly drying on a document dated 1993. A health inspection report from a different restaurant in a different town, where a woman had died from food poisoning that could have been prevented, where the case had been settled quietly, sealed by a judge whose signature, if anyone had looked close enough, read Randolph. But nobody was looking at old documents. Everyone was watching Amelia Washington stand perfectly still in the middle of Billy's place, surrounded by silence and certainty and the breaking of something far more fragile than porcelain. Outside, Tyler's patrol car pulled into the parking lot, and with it came the sound of consequences beginning their slow, inevitable roll toward everyone who'd already decided they knew exactly what truth looked like. Tyler Birch had been a police officer for 17 years, and in that time, he'd learned to read a room the way some men read newspapers, quickly, efficiently, looking for the headlines that mattered. But when he walked through the door of Billy's place that Tuesday morning, the headline was written in a language he'd spent his entire adult life trying not to understand. The restaurant smelled like it always did: coffee, bacon grease, and that particular scent of old wood and older memories. But underneath it now was something else, something acidic and wrong, like fear disguised as righteousness. The customers had arranged themselves into an audience without realizing it, their breakfast plates pushed aside, their attention fixed on the young black woman standing near the kitchen door with the kind of stillness that only comes from practice or resignation. Tyler's eyes found Graham first, always Graham first, the way it had been since they were 6 years old and Graham had shared his lunch when Tyler's mother forgot to pack one. Graham stood near the register with his arms crossed over his chest, that defensive posture Tyler recognized from 1,000 childhood arguments, where Graham had been wrong, but too proud to admit it. His face was flushed, his jaw set in that particular way that meant he'd already decided he was the hero of whatever story was unfolding. "Thanks for coming so fast," Graham said, and his voice carried that forced casualness of someone trying to convince everyone, including himself, that this was all perfectly normal, perfectly justified, perfectly fine. Tyler nodded slowly, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his belt near his radio, a habit from years of walking into situations where the truth wasn't immediately visible. "What's going on, Graham?" Robert Caldwell's wallet went missing, had $400 in it. Graham gestured toward Robert, who stood near the window like a Confederate monument, solid, unmovable, radiating that particular authority that comes from generations of being listened to without question. Only happened after she served his table. He pointed toward Amelia without looking directly at her, as if eye contact might complicate the simple narrative he'd constructed. Tyler's gaze shifted to the young woman, really seeing her for the first time. She stood maybe 5'6", with her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her uniform clean despite the long shift she'd clearly been working. But it was her face that stopped him, not because it showed guilt or innocence, but because it showed neither. She looked at him with the calm assessment of someone taking measurements, like a tailor sizing up fabric for a suit that hadn't been made yet. "Ma'am?" Tyler said, his voice automatically softening the way it did when he was trying to de-escalate. "I'm Officer Birch. I just need to ask you a few questions." "Of course," Amelia replied, and her voice was quiet but clear, with an accent that suggested education, careful diction, someone who'd learned to speak in a way that made people listen despite their prejudices. "I've already emptied my pockets. I've already explained I didn't take anything, but I understand you have a job to do." Something in the way she said it, that particular emphasis on "you have a job to do," made Tyler's stomach tighten. It reminded him of other situations, other choices, other moments when doing his job had somehow meant not doing the right thing. "Graham," Tyler said, turning back to his oldest friend, "did you check the security cameras?" Graham's face flickered, just for a second, with something that looked like irritation at having his authority questioned. "Cameras have been broken for 2 weeks, waiting on the repair guy. Did you search the other staff?" "They've been here for years, Tyler, years." "We know them. Did you check if maybe the wallet just fell somewhere under a booth behind the—" "Tyler." Graham's voice dropped lower now, intimate, the voice of shared history and mutual protection. He stepped closer, close enough that Tyler could smell the coffee on his breath, see the tiny red veins in his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Remember 2009? Remember when those state auditors came sniffing around about my taxes? Remember who helped me understand what documents to keep and what documents maybe didn't need to be found?" Tyler's jaw tightened. Of course he remembered. He remembered lying awake for months afterward, remembered his wife Sarah's face when she'd figured out what he'd done, remembered the way she'd looked at him differently after that, like she'd discovered a stranger sleeping in her bed. "That's different," Tyler said quietly. "Is it?" Graham's eyes locked onto his, and there was something desperate in them now, something that looked like a man drowning and reaching for anything to hold on to. "I protected you, brother. You protected me. That's what we do. That's what we've always done. This place," he gestured around the restaurant, his voice rising slightly. "This is my family's legacy. I can't have people thinking they can just steal from us. I can't have the regional association hearing about this. I need this handled, properly, officially." Tyler felt the weight of 17 years pressing down on his shoulders, 17 years of small compromises, little justifications, moments where he'd chosen the easier path because the harder one required a courage he wasn't sure he possessed. He looked back at Amelia, and she was watching him now with an expression that was somehow both knowing and patient, as if she could see the war happening inside him and had already predicted which side would win. "Ma'am," Tyler heard himself say, the word coming out before he'd fully decided to speak it, "I'm going to need you to come down to the station with me, just to answer some formal questions." "Am I under arrest?" Amelia asked, and there was no fear in her voice, just curiosity, like someone confirming a hypothesis. Tyler hesitated. Protocol said he needed probable cause for an arrest. Protocol said he should investigate further first. Protocol said a lot of things that somehow never seemed to matter when it was easier to look the other way. "For now, you're being detained for questioning," he said, the official language creating distance between him and what he was actually doing. "If you could please turn around and put your hands behind your back." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment, Tyler saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. Not accusation exactly, but something worse, disappointment. As if she'd hoped for better, and wasn't surprised to be proven wrong. She turned slowly, placing her hands behind her back with the practiced ease of someone who'd perhaps done this before or had known it was coming. As Tyler reached for his handcuffs, the metal cold and familiar in his hands, Amelia spoke, her voice so quiet that only he could hear it. "Officer Birch," she said, "are you absolutely certain of what you're doing?" It was almost the exact same question she'd asked Graham earlier, and it landed with the same strange weight. Not a plea, but an offering. A last chance. A moment where a different choice was still possible. Tyler's hands trembled slightly as he closed the cuffs around her thin wrists. They clicked shut with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the suddenly silent restaurant. He could feel Graham's grateful gaze on his back, could sense the approval of Robert Caldwell and the other customers, could feel himself sinking deeper into the comfortable lie that this was justice, that this was proper, that this was anything other than what it actually was. As he guided Amelia toward the door, her steps steady and unhurried, she spoke again, this time loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "Your name is still going to be on that uniform," she said, looking back at Graham with an expression that was somehow both sad and certain, "but not in the way you're expecting." Graham's face flushed darker, but he said nothing. Tyler felt those words settle into his chest like stones, heavy and cold. In Amelia's pocket, carefully folded against her hip, was the letter she'd been carrying since she took this job. Tyler had glimpsed it earlier when she'd emptied her pockets, expensive paper, official-looking, with a signature at the bottom that read, "Justice Randolph," in the kind of careful script that comes from signing important documents all day long. He hadn't asked about it, hadn't wanted to know, because knowing might have made what he was doing even harder to justify to himself later, in the dark, when sleep wouldn't come. The patrol car door closed with a heavy thunk, sealing Amelia in the back seat. Through the mesh barrier, Tyler could see her reflection in the rearview mirror, calm, composed, looking out the window at Billy's place, like someone memorizing details for a report she'd write later. As Tyler pulled out of the parking lot, his phone buzzed with a text from Graham. "Thank you, brother, I owe you one." Tyler didn't respond. He just drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tight, his jaw clenched against words he couldn't say and wouldn't know how to voice even if he could. Behind him, Amelia sat in silence, and somehow that silence felt louder than any accusation could have been. The Millbrook police station occupied a single-story brick building that had once been a hardware store, back when the town was prosperous enough to need such things. Now it served as both police headquarters and a monument to budget cuts. Flickering fluorescent lights, linoleum floors worn through to the concrete in places, and the perpetual smell of burnt coffee and old paperwork that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. Tyler led Amelia through the side entrance, avoiding the main lobby where old Mrs. Patterson worked dispatch and had a mouth faster than the police scanner. The less people who saw this, the better, though even as he thought it, Tyler knew that was a fool's hope. In a town like Millbrook, news traveled through phone lines and church pews faster than any official report. The holding area consisted of 3 chairs bolted to the floor and a single desk where Tyler was supposed to process detainees. He gestured for Amelia to sit, then busied himself with paperwork he didn't really need to fill out yet, anything to avoid looking directly at her. The handcuffs still gleamed on her wrists, catching the harsh overhead light in a way that made Tyler's stomach twist. "You can take these off now," Amelia said quietly. It wasn't a request or a demand, just a statement of fact. "I'm not going anywhere, and we both know I'm not dangerous." Tyler's hands moved to his belt where the cuff key hung, then stopped. Removing them meant admitting this whole thing was theater, a performance of justice rather than the real thing. Leaving them on meant continuing the pretense that she was actually a threat, that this detention was legitimate, that he was doing his job and not just protecting his oldest friend from consequences. He removed them. The metal came away from her wrists, leaving red marks that would fade but somehow felt permanent. Amelia rubbed her wrists slowly, methodically, and when she looked up at Tyler, her eyes held something he couldn't quite name. Not anger, not fear, but a kind of patient assessment that made him feel like a specimen under glass. "Why didn't you defend yourself?" Tyler asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. He pulled a chair over and sat down, suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything he was pretending not to understand. "Back at the restaurant, you just accepted it." Amelia smiled, just a slight curve at the corner of her mouth, the kind of smile that holds secrets. "Officer Birch," she said, and the formality of it felt like a wall between them. "I'm not the one who's going to lose sleep tonight." The words hit him like a slap, precise and stinging. Tyler felt his face flush because she was right. He knew she was right, He'd probably lie awake for hours, staring at his bedroom ceiling, replaying this moment and trying to convince himself he'd done the necessary thing, the reasonable thing, anything but the cowardly thing. "Look," he said, leaning forward, trying to find some foothold of authority in a situation that was sliding away from him. "I'm just trying to do my job here. A wallet went missing. You were the newest employee. That's basic police work." "Is it?" Amelia tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Or is it basic something else?" Before Tyler could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket, a sharp, insistent vibration that made him jump. He pulled it out, grateful for the interruption, and saw Graham's name on the screen. Not a text this time, but a call. Tyler let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering, stepping away toward the corner of the room. "Tyler," Graham's voice came through tight and breathless. "Listen, I've been thinking. Maybe this is enough. The message is sent. You could just, ask her some questions and let her go with a warning or something." Tyler's jaw clenched. Now Graham wanted to backtrack now that the dirty work was done, now that Tyler's hands were the ones stained with this choice. "You called me because you wanted this handled officially," Tyler said quietly, his back to Amelia but acutely aware she could probably hear every word. "You said you needed it on record." I know, but Sarah Clemens just came in. The reporter from the county register. She's asking questions about why police were called, and someone posted something on Facebook already. This might get bigger than what, Graham, than you thought? Than was convenient." Tyler's voice rose despite himself, 17 years of swallowed words suddenly pressing against his throat. "You made me come down here. You made me put handcuffs on someone because you were scared and needed to feel powerful for 5 minutes. So now we finish it." He hung up before Graham could respond, his hand shaking slightly as he shoved the phone back in his pocket. When he turned around, Amelia was watching him with that same patient expression, like a teacher waiting for a slow student to work through a difficult problem. "He's going to throw you under the bus, she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "When this goes bad, and it will go bad, he'll say you made the call, that you insisted, that he tried to stop you but you were too aggressive, too quick to judgment. He'll paint himself as the reasonable one who got caught up in your overzealousness." "You don't know that," Tyler said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "Don't I?" Amelia leaned back in her chair, and for the first time, something harder entered her voice. "Officer Birch, I've been watching men like Graham Keller my entire life. Men who smile and shake hands and call themselves good people, right up until the moment it costs them something to actually be good. Then suddenly they discover they have principles they just can't compromise, standards they just have to maintain. And there's always someone else, someone like you, willing to do the actual dirty work while they keep their hands clean." Tyler felt something crack inside his chest, some careful structure he'd built to explain himself to himself. Didn't you?" Amelia's eyes locked onto his, and there was steel in them now, the kind that comes from being tempered by heat and pressure. "You put handcuffs on me without evidence, without investigation, without even checking if that wallet might have fallen behind the booth or gotten kicked under a table. You did it because your friend asked you to, and because it was easier than asking hard questions. That's not fair." "Fair?" Amelia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Officer, I was arrested for existing while black in a white man's restaurant. We stopped worrying about fair a long time ago." The silence that followed was broken only by the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of Mrs. Patterson's radio, crackling with some routine traffic stop on Highway 82. Tyler sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 39 years. "Who are you?" he asked finally. "Really?" Amelia's hand moved to her pocket, pulling out the folded letter Tyler had seen earlier. She held it for a moment, running her thumb along the creased edge, then set it on the desk between them. The paper was expensive, the kind government offices used for official correspondence. Through the fold, Tyler could see part of a seal, the edge of a signature. "You could open it," Amelia said. "Read it. It would answer a lot of questions." Tyler stared at the letter like it might bite him. Part of him wanted to know, needed to know, but another part, the part that had learned to survive by not asking questions that might have uncomfortable answers, wanted to push it away, finish the paperwork, and pretend this was just another routine detention. "Or," Amelia continued, her voice softening slightly, "you could just ask me, like a human being asking another human being, not a cop interrogating a suspect." Tyler looked up at her, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion behind her composure. Saw the girl who'd sat in that storage room at 4 in the morning with broken porcelain at her feet. Saw someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who'd woken up that morning and put on a clean uniform and tried to do an honest day's work. "Why did you take this job?" he asked. "At Billy's place specifically?" Amelia's expression shifted, something painful and old moving across her face like shadows. "Because my mother died in a restaurant," she said quietly. "Food poisoning. 1993. The health inspectors found 17 violations, but somehow the case got settled quietly. Sealed records, no charges. The owner paid a fine so small it was insulting, and the judge who approved the settlement retired early with a very comfortable pension." Tyler's mouth went dry. "And you think Graham—" "I know Graham was a minority partner in the restaurant chain that owned that place," Amelia interrupted. "I know because I spent 5 years looking through every public record I could find. I know because when you grow up without a mother, you tend to remember why she's gone." The letter sat between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Tyler could see more of the signature now. Justice Randolph, written in black ink, official and undeniable. "That's your father's signature," Tyler said. It wasn't a question. "That's my father's signature," Amelia confirmed. "Judge Marcus Randolph, Federal Circuit Court. And before you ask, yes, he knows I'm here. In fact, he suggested it." By noon, the story had spread through Millbrook like kudzu in summer. Fast, invasive, and impossible to contain. At the Piggly Wiggly, cashiers whispered between scanning groceries. At First Baptist Church, the prayer circle became a gossip circle, voices dropping to conspiratorial murmurs when discussing the situation at Billy's place. At the high school where Tyler's ex-wife Sarah taught English, students checked their phones between classes, reading Facebook posts and Instagram stories that transformed a routine detention into something much larger, much uglier, much harder to ignore. "Black waitress arrested at Billy's, no evidence, just racism," read one post, shared 47 times already. "Another innocent person targeted by small-town cops," read another, with a grainy photo someone had snapped through the restaurant window showing Tyler leading Amelia to his patrol car. The comments section was a war zone, some defending Graham and Tyler, talking about property rights and the need for law and order, others calling for boycotts and investigations and justice. The truth, as always, was drowning somewhere in the middle, gasping for air that neither side wanted to provide. Tyler sat at his desk in the station. The letter from Judge Randolph spread open before him like evidence at a crime scene. He'd read it 3 times now, each reading making his hands shake a little more. The language was formal, judicial, carefully worded in a way that said everything while promising nothing. "To whom it may concern. This letter serves to verify that Amelia Washington is engaged in legitimate research regarding historical restaurant safety violations in Alabama. She has my full support in this endeavor and should be afforded all courtesies and cooperation. Any questions regarding her activities may be directed to my office. Justice Marcus Randolph, U.S. Circuit Court, 11th Circuit." It was a shield disguised as an introduction, a warning dressed up as a formality, and Tyler, in his eagerness to help Graham, in his cowardice masquerading as loyalty, had walked right past it without looking. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Text messages from Graham increasingly frantic. "People are saying we're racists. The regional association called. They want a statement. Tyler, what do we do?" Each message a small knife, cutting away at the comfortable narrative Tyler had built around himself, that he was one of the good ones, that he treated everyone fairly, that he'd never let prejudice influence his decisions. But there was another message too, one that made Tyler's blood run cold. It came from a number he didn't recognize, simple and direct. "Officer Tyler Birch, we're watching. Choose your next steps carefully. A friend of justice." Someone knocked on his office door, 3 sharp raps that made Tyler jump. Officer Dennis Webb stuck his head in, his face carefully neutral in a way that told Tyler everything he needed to know. Webb was 53, had been on the force since before Tyler graduated high school, and possessed that particular talent of knowing everyone's business while pretending to know nothing at all. "Got a minute?" Webb asked, though he was already stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Sure," Tyler said, folding the letter quickly and sliding it into his desk drawer, as if hiding it might somehow erase what he'd already read. Webb settled into the chair across from Tyler's desk with a heavy sigh. The kind of sigh that carried the weight of uncomfortable conversations. Want to tell me what's really going on with this Washington girl? It's a straightforward theft investigation, Tyler said automatically, the lie coming easier now that he'd practiced it. Missing wallet. She was the most recent hire. We're just doing due diligence. Uh-huh. Webb pulled a toothpick from his shirt pocket and worked it between his teeth, a habit from his long-abandoned smoking days. And the fact that Graham Keller is your best friend since you were in diapers, that's got nothing to do with how fast you responded to his call? Tyler felt his jaw tighten. I respond to all calls professionally. Sure you do. Webb leaned back, studying Tyler with eyes that had seen too many good cops make bad choices. You know what I heard? I heard Graham's got some old documents that might be problematic. Health code violations from a restaurant chain he was involved with back in the 90s. I heard someone might have been sniffing around those records. Someone young, someone black, someone who might have a personal interest in seeing certain names attached to certain failures. The office suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Tyler's collar seemed too tight. Where'd you hear that? Same place I hear everything. Maybelle down at the county clerk's office. She says a young woman came in 3 weeks ago, requested files on the old Anderson chain restaurants, said she was doing research for a college project. Webb paused, letting that sink in. Maybelle also mentioned this girl had a very particular way of talking, educated, careful, like someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. Tyler's mind raced back through every moment of the morning. Amelia's calm acceptance, her lack of surprise, the way she'd asked if he was certain of what he was doing. Not the questions of someone afraid of being caught, but the questions of someone documenting reactions, gathering evidence, building a case. Jesus, Tyler whispered. Yeah. Webb shifted the toothpick to the other side of his mouth. Now, I don't know if that girl took any wallet or not, but I do know that you arrested her without a shred of evidence beyond Graham's say-so, and I know that if this goes sideways, and son, it's already going sideways, you're the one wearing the badge. You're the one whose name is in the report. You're the one who put handcuffs on her. Graham said he needed... I don't care what Graham said. Webb's voice hardened, the first real edge entering it. Graham's not a cop. Graham doesn't take an oath. Graham gets to go home tonight and sleep just fine, because he'll tell himself he was just protecting his business, just being cautious, just doing what any reasonable person would do. But you, he pointed at Tyler with the toothpick, you put on that uniform every morning and swear to serve and protect, and today you protected your friend's reputation instead of actually investigating what happened. The truth of it landed like a fist to the gut. Tyler opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, to explain about loyalty and friendship and the complicated history that tied him to Graham, but the words died before they could form. Because Webb was right. Because deep down, in the place where Tyler couldn't lie to himself, he'd known it was wrong the moment he'd closed those handcuffs. What do I do? Tyler asked quietly, and hated himself for the weakness in his voice. Webb stood up, pausing at the door. Well, for starters, you could actually investigate. Check if that wallet turned up. Talk to the other staff, look at Graham's financial records, see if maybe he's in deeper trouble than he's letting on and needed an easy scapegoat. Do your actual job instead of your friend's dirty work. After Webb left, Tyler sat in the silence of his office, listening to the hum of the old air conditioning unit and the distant sound of Mrs. Patterson answering phones. His hands moved without conscious thought, pulling open his desk drawer and retrieving the letter, unfolding it once more to stare at that signature. Justice Randolph, a federal circuit judge, a man whose daughter had somehow ended up in Graham's restaurant, in Tyler's handcuffs, in a situation that was rapidly spiraling from a small-town squabble into something much bigger. And Tyler, caught in the middle, realized with creeping horror that he'd been played, not by Amelia but by his own willingness to not see, to not question, to choose the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. The eyes of justice are upon you, officer. The question is, what will they see? Tyler looked up at his office wall where his badge hung in a shadow box his father had given him on graduation day from the police academy. Underneath it, a small plaque read, "To protect and serve with honor." He'd looked at it every day for 17 years, letting his eyes slide over the words without really reading them, without really considering what they demanded of him. In the holding area, Amelia Washington sat with her hands folded in her lap, waiting with the patience of someone who knew exactly how this story would end. She'd asked her questions. She'd given her warnings. She'd offered chances for different choices. Now all that remained was to see which version of themselves these men would choose to become, the version they told themselves they were, or the version their actions revealed them to be. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Millbrook, Alabama, heavy and dark and full of rain that had been building for much longer than just one morning. The rain started at 2:47 p.m., fat drops that hit the station windows like accusations, each one a small percussion of judgment. Tyler stood in the doorway of the holding area, a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee in each hand, one for him, one for Amelia, though he wasn't sure if offering it was an apology or just another way of pretending this was all normal, all professional, all somehow defensible. Amelia looked up when he entered, and something in her eyes had shifted. The steel was still there, but underneath it now was something rawer, more human. Exhaustion, maybe. Or the weight of carrying a story too heavy to hold alone for too long. "Peace offering," Tyler said awkwardly, extending one of the cups. "It's terrible, but it's hot." She took it with a small nod, wrapping both hands around the cup as if drawing warmth from it, though the holding area was stuffy and close. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence was broken only by the rain against glass and the distant rumble of thunder that promised this storm was just beginning. "Can I ask you something?" Tyler finally said, pulling up the metal chair that had become too familiar over the past few hours. "And I mean really ask, not as a cop, just as someone who's trying to understand." Amelia studied him over the rim of her coffee cup, then nodded slowly. "Go ahead. Why didn't you just tell Graham who your father was? Right at the start. Why let it get this far?" A sad smile crossed Amelia's face, the kind of smile that holds years of disappointment. "Because I needed to see who people really were when they thought I was nobody, when they thought I had no power, no protection, no voice that mattered." She paused, taking a sip of the coffee and grimacing slightly at the bitter taste. "You can learn a lot about a person by how they treat someone they think can't hurt them back." Tyler felt those words settle into his chest like stones. "Your father, Judge Randolph, he put you up to this?" "Not exactly." Amelia set down the cup and leaned back against the cinder block wall, her eyes distant now, focused on something Tyler couldn't see. "My father is a complicated man, Officer Birch. He's brilliant, powerful, respected. He spent 30 years on the federal bench ruling on cases that affect thousands of lives, but when it came to his own life, his own choices..." She trailed off, her voice catching slightly. "What happened?" Tyler asked quietly. Amelia was silent for so long that Tyler thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began. "My mother was Maria Washington. She worked as a line cook at Anderson's family restaurant in Montgomery. 23 years old, beautiful, with dreams of opening her own place someday. She met my father when he came in for lunch one day. He was just a young prosecutor then, ambitious, charming. They had an affair that lasted 6 months. Tyler listened, not interrupting, sensing that this was a story that needed to be told whole without pause. When she got pregnant with me, he panicked. He was married, white, building a political career in Alabama in the early 90s. You can imagine how that would have looked. So he gave her money, promised to take care of things, and then disappeared from her life completely." Amelia's hands clenched slightly around the coffee cup. "She raised me alone, worked double shifts, never complained, never said a bad word about him, even when I asked. She just said, 'Baby, some people aren't built for the hard parts of love.'" Thunder cracked closer now, rattling the windows. Tyler felt his throat tighten. "She died when I was 8 years old," Amelia continued, and now her voice was flat, reciting facts to keep emotions at bay. "Food poisoning from the restaurant where she worked. Salmonella in the chicken. The health inspectors found violations everywhere. Broken refrigerators, improper food storage, expired ingredients. The owners knew. They'd been warned. But fixing those things cost money, and money mattered more than the people who worked there. And the case was settled quietly," Tyler said, remembering what she'd told him earlier. "Judge Marcus Randolph presided over the settlement," Amelia confirmed. "I didn't know it at the time. I was just a kid being shuffled to my grandmother's house, trying to understand why Mama wasn't coming home. But years later, when I was 14 and going through my grandmother's papers, I found a letter from him, explaining that he was my father, that he'd been watching from a distance, that he'd made sure the settlement was fair, and that a portion would be set aside for my education." Her voice broke slightly on that last word, and for the first time since Tyler had arrested her, he saw tears in her eyes, though they didn't fall. "Blood money," she whispered. That's what it was. He couldn't save her because that would have meant admitting his connection to her. So instead he let her die, smoothed over the legal complications, and sent me a check like that could ever balance the scales. Tyler felt sick. Jesus, Amelia. I'm so sorry. Are you? She looked at him sharply now, and the tears were gone, burned away by something fiercer. Are you sorry for me, or are you sorry for yourself? Sorry that you're part of this now? Sorry that you put handcuffs on the daughter of a federal judge without even asking basic questions? The accusation stung because it was true. Tyler opened his mouth to defend himself, then closed it again. What could he say that wouldn't sound like an excuse? My father told me something when I turned 18, Amelia said, her voice steady again. He said, the law is supposed to be blind, Amelia, but in reality it has excellent vision. It sees race, class, power. It sees who matters and who doesn't. If you want to change that, you have to make it see what it's been avoiding. So this whole thing, working at Graham's restaurant, waiting to be accused, this was a test. Tyler's mind was racing, trying to piece together the full picture of what he'd stumbled into. Everything's a test, Officer Birch. Amelia's eyes locked onto his. Every choice, every moment when you have to decide between what's easy and what's right. My father spent my whole childhood testing me, putting me in situations to see if I'd break, if I'd compromise, if I'd become like him, or like the people who let my mother die. He wanted to know if I was strong enough to survive in a world that would always underestimate me. That's a terrible way to raise a child, Tyler said. Yes, Amelia agreed simply. It was. I grew up without hugs, without bedtime stories, without anyone telling me I was loved just for existing. Every visit from him was an evaluation. Every conversation was a lesson in hiding pain and showing strength. He never came to my school plays, never met my friends, never acted like a father, but he watched, always watched. And when he saw me getting accepted to college, saw me graduating, saw me refusing to take his money unless I'd earned it, I think maybe he was proud, in his own cold, twisted way. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof like fingers demanding entry. Tyler could hear voices in the main station, Mrs. Patterson talking to someone, the words indistinct but the tone urgent. Why are you telling me all this? Tyler asked. Amelia's expression softened slightly. Because I think you're not a bad person, Officer Birch. I think you're a coward, and that's different. Cowards can change if they find something worth being brave for. Bad people just find new ways to justify what they already want to do. Before Tyler could respond, the door burst open. Officer Webb stood there, his face grave. Tyler, you need to see this now. Tyler followed Webb to the front of the station, where a small crowd had gathered outside despite the rain. Protesters, maybe 20 people, holding signs that read, Justice for Amelia, and Investigate Billy's Place, and Black Lives Matter in Millbrook too. At the front stood a woman Tyler recognized, Sarah Clemens, the reporter from the County Register, her camera crew setting up under a tarp. And behind them, just arriving in a black sedan with federal plates, a man in his 60s stepped out into the rain. Tall, dignified, with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime commanding rooms. He didn't hurry despite the downpour, just walked toward the station entrance with the calm certainty of someone who knew doors would open for him. Judge Marcus Randolph had arrived. Judge Marcus Randolph walked into the Millbrook police station like a man entering his own courtroom, unhurried, self-assured, with the kind of presence that made everyone instinctively straighten their posture. Water dripped from his expensive wool coat onto the worn linoleum, each drop a small punctuation mark in the sudden silence that had fallen over the building. Even Mrs. Patterson, who'd been answering phones at that desk for 32 years and had seen everything small-town Alabama could throw at her, went quiet. Tyler felt his pulse hammering in his throat. He'd faced down armed suspects, broken up bar fights, delivered death notifications to grieving families, but somehow this felt more terrifying, standing before a federal judge whose daughter he'd arrested on nothing but his best friend's paranoid accusation. "I'm looking for Officer Tyler Birch," the judge said, his voice carrying the precise diction of someone who'd spent decades making sure every word counted, every syllable landed with intention. "That's me, Your Honor." Tyler stepped forward, his legs feeling unsteady, like he was walking on a ship's deck in rough seas. Randolph's eyes swept over him, a quick, assessing look that seemed to catalog everything. The coffee stain on Tyler's uniform shirt, the shadows under his eyes from too many sleepless nights, the slight tremor in his hands that Tyler couldn't quite control. "Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" It wasn't really a question. Tyler led him to the small conference room they used for witness interviews, a windowless space with a table, 4 chairs, and walls the color of old cigarette smoke. The judge sat down with careful precision, placing his leather briefcase on the table between them, like evidence being presented. "Where is my daughter?" Randolph asked. "In the holding area. She's not formally charged with anything, just being held for questioning." Tyler heard himself using that bureaucratic language again, that safe distance of official procedure, and hated himself for it. Questioning. The judge repeated the word as if examining it for flaws. "Regarding a wallet that went missing under circumstances you haven't actually investigated, involving accusations made by a man who has significant financial motivation to deflect attention from his own potential legal troubles." Tyler felt sweat prickling at the back of his neck despite the air conditioning. "I was responding to a call from a business owner." "You were responding to a call from your childhood friend," Randolph interrupted, his voice sharp now, cutting through Tyler's excuses like a scalpel through tissue. "Graham Keller. You've known him since you were 6 years old. He helped you cheat on a history test in 9th grade. You were best man at his wedding. In 2009, you helped him lose certain documents when state auditors were investigating his tax records." He paused, letting that sink in. "Yes, Officer Birch, I know about that." Tyler's mouth went dry. "How?" "Because I make it my business to know." The judge leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the table in a pose Tyler recognized from countless TV courtroom dramas, the posture of someone about to deliver a verdict. "When my daughter told me she wanted to investigate the old Anderson chain restaurants to understand what really happened to her mother, I did my homework. I looked into every person she might encounter, every business owner, every local official, every police officer who might be called if things went wrong." "You knew this would happen," Tyler said, and it wasn't a question anymore. It was an accusation. "You knew Graham would panic. You knew he'd call me. You set this whole thing up." "I gave my daughter information," Randolph corrected coldly. "What she chose to do with it was her decision. What you chose to do when faced with an ethical test was yours." He opened his briefcase, pulling out a manila folder thick with documents. "This is what I know about you, Tyler Birch. 17 years on the force. Generally good performance reviews. No excessive force complaints. Married to Sarah Collins for 8 years. Divorced 3 years ago after she discovered you'd falsified a police report to protect a friend. You have a daughter, Emma, age 12, who you see every other weekend. You coach her soccer team. You still send your ex-wife flowers on her birthday even though she's asked you to stop." Each fact landed like a blow. Tyler felt exposed, every private shame and small failure laid bare under the fluorescent lights. "You're not a monster, Officer Birch," the judge continued. "You're something much more common and much more dangerous. You're a man who wants to be good, but isn't willing to pay the price that goodness demands. You want to sleep well at night, but you also want the approval of your friends. You want to do the right thing, but only when it doesn't cost you anything important. That's not fair," Tyler started, but Randolph's raised hand stopped him. "Fair? Let me tell you about fair." The judge's voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. "My daughter grew up without a mother because I was too much of a coward to admit I'd fathered a child with a black woman. I let Maria Washington die in that restaurant because acknowledging her meant destroying my career, my marriage, my carefully constructed life. I presided over a settlement that was a joke, that valued her life at less than what some people spend on a used car, and I told myself it was the best I could do given the circumstances." For the first time, Tyler saw something crack in the judge's composed facade, a flash of pain so raw it was almost physical. "I spent years watching my daughter from a distance," Randolph continued, "sending money through intermediaries, making sure she got into good schools, clearing obstacles from her path while never, ever acknowledging her in public. I told myself I was protecting her, that my attention would bring her more harm than good, but the truth is, I was protecting myself. And every time I saw her, every supervised visit in some neutral location, every awkward conversation where she called me sir instead of dad, I saw my own cowardice reflected back at me." Tyler sat frozen, unsure what to say, unsure if anything he said would matter. So when she came to me and said she wanted to investigate what happened to her mother, when she said she wanted to put herself in situations where she'd be vulnerable to see how people with power would respond, I agreed. Because maybe, just maybe, if I couldn't save her mother, I could help her save someone else. I could help her prove that justice isn't just a word we put on buildings and badges. It's a choice we make every single day, in every small interaction, when no one important is watching. The judge stood up, snapping his briefcase closed with a sound like a gavel striking wood. My daughter will be released immediately. No charges, no record. And you, Officer Birch, will have to live with the choice you made today. You'll lie awake tonight and every night wondering who you really are when the test comes. Wondering if you're the man you tell yourself you are, or if you're just another person who found it easier to hurt someone powerless than to challenge someone powerful. He walked to the door, then paused, looking back at Tyler with something that might have been pity. She'll forgive you eventually. My daughter has a bigger heart than I ever did, but the question is, will you forgive yourself? After he left, Tyler sat alone in that small room, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. His phone buzzed. Another text from Graham. I found the wallet. It was under the register the whole time. Just let her go quietly, okay? No need to make this a big thing. Tyler stared at the message for a long time. Found it. The whole time. After Tyler had already arrested someone, already put handcuffs on her, already branded her a criminal in the eyes of everyone who'd been watching. He thought about his daughter, Emma, about the kind of man he wanted her to believe he was. He thought about all the small compromises that had led him to this moment, all the times he'd chosen comfort over courage, friendship over principle, easy lies over hard truths. And for the first time in 17 years, Tyler Birch took off his badge and set it on the table, staring at it like a stranger examining something that had never really belonged to him at all. 3 days later, Tyler stood outside Billy's place at dawn, no longer wearing a uniform, just jeans, a faded auburn t-shirt, and the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. The restaurant was dark, closed by order of the county health department, pending a full inspection that had somehow, mysteriously, been expedited after Judge Randolph made a few phone calls to the right offices. A yellow notice was taped to the front door, official and damning, listing violations that had apparently existed for years but had never quite made it into formal reports. Tyler had spent those 3 days in a strange limbo, suspended pending an internal investigation, his badge and gun turned in, his future uncertain. He'd sat in his apartment, unable to eat, unable to sleep, replaying every moment of that Tuesday morning. He kept seeing Amelia's face when he'd closed the handcuffs, kept hearing her question, "Are you absolutely certain of what you're doing?" He hadn't been certain. That was the truth he couldn't escape. He'd been afraid of disappointing Graham, afraid of questioning authority, afraid of being the kind of person who made waves instead of the kind who went along to get along. And that fear had made him cruel in a way that felt worse than violence, because it had been so casual, so automatic, so wrapped in the language of procedure and responsibility. The passenger door of a familiar pickup truck opened, and Graham Keller stepped out. He looked terrible, unshaven, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them, or more likely, hadn't slept at all. "You came," Graham said, and there was something desperate in his voice, something that reminded Tyler of the scared kid who'd shown up at his door at midnight when Graham's father was on one of his drunken rages. "You said you needed to talk," Tyler replied, his voice flat, empty of the warmth that had always been there before. 33 years of friendship creates a particular kind of voice, easy, comfortable, full of shared references and inside jokes. That voice was gone now, and what replaced it was the voice of two strangers conducting business. Graham flinched at the tone. "Tyler, Jesus, I don't even know where to start. How about with the fact that you found the wallet under your own register?" Tyler's anger was quiet, which somehow made it more devastating than if he'd shouted. "How about the fact that you let me arrest an innocent woman because you were too chicken shit to admit you'd made a mistake? I panicked, okay?" Graham's voice cracked. "Robert Caldwell was making noise about reporting us to the regional association. The inspection was coming up. I needed everything to look tight, controlled, professional. And then that money went missing, and I assumed, you assumed the black girl did it," Tyler finished. "Because that was easier than actually investigating. Easier than questioning whether precious Robert Caldwell Might have just lost his own damn wallet in his own truck. That's not fair. No. Tyler stepped closer, and Graham actually took a step back. Then tell me, Graham, when's the last time you called the cops on one of your white employees? When's the last time you assumed guilt without evidence when it was someone who looked like you? The silence stretched between them, broken only by the morning birds and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Graham opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came because they both knew the answer. I told the truth, Tyler said quietly, to the investigators, about 2009. About the tax documents I helped you hide. About every time I bent the rules because you asked me to, because we were friends, because I thought that's what loyalty meant. Graham's face went pale. Tyler, you can't. That'll destroy me. The restaurant is already under investigation. If they find out about the tax stuff too, I know, Tyler said. And there was no satisfaction in it, no triumph. Just the heavy, terrible weight of doing the right thing too late. I know it'll probably mean charges. I know you might lose everything. And I know our friendship is over because of it. But Graham, I can't keep protecting you from the consequences of your own choices. Not anymore. We promised, Graham said. And now there were tears in his eyes, his voice breaking on the words. We promised we'd always have each other's backs. Since we were kids. You and me against the world. Yeah, we did. Tyler felt his own throat tighten. Grief for something that had already died but was only now being buried. But somewhere along the way, having each other's backs stopped meaning friendship and started meaning being accomplices. It started meaning I'd compromise everything I was supposed to stand for just to keep you comfortable. A black sedan pulled into the parking lot. The same federal plates Tyler recognized from 3 days ago. Judge Randolph's car. But it wasn't the judge who stepped out. It was Amelia, wearing jeans and a simple blue shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in that practical ponytail. She looked younger somehow, and also older, like someone who'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. She walked over to where Tyler and Graham stood, her steps measured and calm. When she reached them, she pulled something from her pocket, a small envelope, aged and yellowed at the edges. This was in my mother's things, she said, holding it out toward Graham. I found it when I was going through her belongings after she died. It's a letter she wrote, but never sent, to the owners of the restaurant where she worked, begging them to fix the refrigerators, warning them someone was going to get sick, offering to chip in money from her own paycheck if that would help. Graham took the letter with trembling hands, unfolding it carefully. Tyler watched his face as he read, saw the exact moment comprehension and horror dawned. The Anderson chain, Graham whispered. My uncle's restaurants. I was listed as a minority investor, but I didn't actually work there. I just took the profits and looked the other way, Amelia finished quietly. I know, I've read all the documents. You were 23 years old, fresh out of college, and you invested money your grandmother left you. You probably never even visited most of those locations. Never saw the broken equipment or the expired food or the exhausted workers who couldn't afford to quit. I didn't know, Graham said, and the words came out like a child's plea. I swear to God, I didn't know anyone died. They just told me there was some legal trouble that got settled. You thought it was handled, Amelia said. And maybe it was. In the way things get handled when lawyers and judges and insurance companies get involved. But my mother was still dead, and somewhere, someone decided her life was worth $47,000 in a sealed settlement, less than the cost of a decent car. She took the letter back, folding it carefully and returning it to her pocket. Then she looked at Graham with an expression that was somehow more devastating than anger. It was pity. I didn't come here for revenge, she said. I came here to understand, to see if people would choose differently when they had the chance, to see if anyone would look at someone like me and see a human being instead of a problem to be solved or a threat to be contained. I'm sorry, Graham said, and the words came out broken, inadequate. I'm so sorry. I believe you are, Amelia replied. But sorry doesn't change what happened. It doesn't bring my mother back. It doesn't undo Officer Birch putting handcuffs on me because you were afraid. Sorry is just the thing people say when they realize actions have consequences. She turned to Tyler then, and her expression softened slightly. Thank you, she said, for telling the truth. I know what it cost you. Tyler nodded, not trusting himself to speak. In the distance, he could see news vans pulling into the parking lot, The story had grown beyond Millbrook now, spreading through state news and social media, becoming one of those moments that made people take sides and argue and feel righteous in their certainty about who was wrong and who was right. But standing there in the parking lot of Billy's place, with the morning sun breaking through clouds and casting long shadows on the pavement, Tyler understood that it was never that simple. There were no pure heroes or absolute villains, just people making choices, some brave and some cowardly, some at the right time and some far too late. Amelia walked back to the sedan, where her father waited. Before she got in, she turned and looked back at the restaurant one last time. Then she picked up something from the ground, a piece of broken porcelain, a shard from the cup that had shattered that morning in the dark. She held it up to the light, examining it, then let it fall from her fingers. The sound it made hitting the pavement was barely audible, but somehow, to Tyler, it sounded like an ending. 6 months later, autumn had painted Alabama in shades of rust and gold, the kind of season that makes everything look gentler than it actually is. Tyler Birch stood in the parking lot of a FedEx distribution center 20 miles outside Millbrook, wearing the purple and orange uniform of a delivery driver, checking his route on a handheld scanner that kept glitching in the cold morning air. His hands, the same hands that had once rested on a service weapon, that had filled out arrest reports, that had closed handcuffs around Amelia Washington's wrists, now handled cardboard boxes and signature pads. The internal investigation had taken 2 months. Tyler had been fired not for arresting Amelia, that could have been justified as a judgment call in the moment, but for the pattern of misconduct that the investigation uncovered once people started looking. The 2009 tax document incident. 3 other times he'd adjusted reports to protect friends or fellow officers. A whole career of small corruptions that seemed harmless in isolation, but together painted a picture of someone who'd never really understood what that badge on his chest was supposed to mean. He didn't fight the termination, didn't hire a lawyer or claim he was being scapegoated, just turned in his equipment, cleaned out his desk, and applied for jobs that didn't require references from law enforcement. The delivery job paid $16.50 an hour, less than half what he'd made as a cop. His apartment was smaller now, in a complex near the highway where the walls were thin and you could hear your neighbors' arguments through the ceiling. He saw his daughter Emma every other weekend still, though now their time together involved less eating out and more cooking spaghetti in his cramped kitchen, playing board games instead of going to movies. But here was the strange thing, the thing Tyler couldn't have predicted. He slept better now. 8 hours most nights, deep and dreamless, the kind of sleep he hadn't managed in years. No more lying awake wondering if he'd done the right thing. No more nightmares about all the times he'd looked away, stayed silent, chosen comfort over conscience. The weight was gone, and he hadn't realized how heavy it had been until he'd finally set it down. His phone buzzed, a text from his ex-wife, Sarah. Emma's soccer team made playoffs. She wants you there Saturday, 2 p.m. at Henderson Field. She misses you. Tyler smiled, something warm unfurling in his chest. He typed back, "Wouldn't miss it. Tell her I'm proud of her." Across town, in what used to be Billy's place, a new business had opened. Maria's Kitchen, a small cafe with bright yellow walls and photographs of smiling faces covering every available surface. The menu was simple, honest food, fairly priced, made by people who were paid living wages and given health insurance. The owner was a cooperative of former restaurant workers who'd pooled their resources and taken out a small business loan. Graham Keller had lost everything in the investigation that followed. The restaurant, his savings, his reputation. The tax fraud charges resulted in a plea deal, 2 years probation, community service, restitution payments that would take him a decade to finish. He'd moved into a double-wide trailer on the edge of the county, the kind of place he'd once driven past without seeing, and found work doing maintenance at the community college. His hands, once soft from years of managing rather than doing, were now calloused from changing air filters and unclogging toilets, and fixing the 1,000 small things that broke in a building full of hopeful young people trying to build better lives. The shame had been crushing at first, the whispers at the grocery store, the former friends who suddenly had other places to be when they saw him coming, the special kind of exile that small towns reserve for those who've fallen from grace. But slowly, gradually, Graham was learning something he'd never had to learn before: humility. The quiet dignity of doing honest work, of showing up on time, of being just another person trying to get by rather than someone who expected the world to accommodate him. He'd tried to reach out to Tyler once, 3 months after everything fell apart, left a voicemail that started with "I'm sorry" and ended with 15 seconds of silence before the click of disconnection. Tyler never called back. Some friendships once broken can't be repaired, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because the people who were friends no longer exist. They've been replaced by different versions of themselves, shaped by consequences and choices, and those new people are strangers to each other. And Amelia Washington, she disappeared from Millbrook the day after that meeting in the parking lot. No forwarding address, no social media updates, just gone like morning fog when the sun finally rises. Tyler sometimes wondered where she was, what she was doing, if she thought about that morning when everything changed, or if she'd moved on to other battles, other tests, other moments of holding up a mirror to show people who they really were. On a grey November afternoon, Tyler was making his last delivery of the day, a package for the law offices of Randolph and Associates in Montgomery. He almost dropped it when he saw the name on the door, his heart suddenly racing. But it was just a small tax firm, no relation to the judge, just one of those coincidences that feel meaningful but aren't. He was walking back to his truck when he heard a voice. "Officer Birch?" He turned, and there she was, Amelia Washington, standing in the entrance of a Greyhound bus station, a duffel bag at her feet, and that same calm expression he remembered from 6 months ago. She looked different somehow, lighter, like someone who'd set down something heavy and decided not to pick it back up. "Not officer anymore," Tyler said, gesturing to his delivery uniform with something that was almost a smile. "Just Tyler now. Just Tyler," she repeated, and walked over to where he stood. "How are you?" "Better than I deserve to be," he said honestly. "You?" "Going to law school," she replied. "Starting in January. Howard University. My father finally agreed to help pay for it, though I made him donate an equal amount to a scholarship fund for children of food service workers who died on the job." Tyler felt his throat tighten. "That's good. That's really good." They stood there in the afternoon light, two people whose lives had collided and forever altered each other's trajectories. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of understanding, of things that didn't need to be said because they were already known. "I forgive you," Amelia said finally. "I wanted you to know that. What you did was wrong, but you owned it. You paid for it. That matters." "Thank you," Tyler whispered, and he meant it in a way that went deeper than words could reach. Amelia picked up her bag. "I have a bus to catch." "But Tyler," she paused, looking at him with those eyes that had seen too much too young but refused to become bitter. "Thank you for choosing the harder thing, even if it was late, even if it cost you. That choice means something." She walked into the station and Tyler watched her go. This young woman who taught him that justice wasn't about badges or authority or the comfortable certainty of knowing you were right. It was about being brave enough to question yourself, to admit when you were wrong, to choose truth even when lies were easier. Tyler drove home as the sun set, painting the Alabama sky in shades of amber and violet. He thought about Emma's soccer game on Saturday, about the packages he'd deliver tomorrow, about the small, honest life he was building from the ruins of the one he'd lost. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when he first put on that uniform 17 years ago, full of pride and certainty, and the comfortable belief that he was one of the good guys, but it was a life he could sleep through. And in the end, maybe that was the only measure that mattered, whether you could close your eyes at night and not be haunted by all the times you chose your comfort over someone else's dignity, your fear over their humanity, your silence over their voice crying out in the dark. In a storage room somewhere, metaphorically if not literally, a cup falls and shatters, but this time someone hears it, someone stops, someone asks the questions that need asking, and in that small moment of choosing differently, something broken begins, slowly and painfully, to heal. In the end, this story asks us the most uncomfortable question of all. What would you have done? Would you have been Tyler, choosing loyalty to a friend over justice for a stranger, only to discover too late that comfort always costs more than we think we're paying? Would you have been Graham, so desperate to protect what you built that you were willing to destroy someone else, never asking if your fear was worth someone else's dignity? Or would you have been Amelia, brave enough to walk into the fire just to see who would choose to burn her and who would choose to pull her out? We like to believe we'd be the hero, that when the test comes we'd choose courage over convenience, truth over tribal loyalty, righteousness over relationships. But the brutal honesty of this story is that most of us are Tyler. Good people who make cowardly choices, who compromise a little here and a little there, until we wake up one day and don't recognize the person staring back in the mirror. The broken cup in that storage room wasn't just porcelain shattering, it was the sound of trust breaking, of innocence dying, of the moment when silence stops being neutral and becomes complicity. Tyler lost his badge but found his sleep. Graham lost everything but learned humility. Amelia carried her mother's memory into battle and emerged with a future built on truth rather than resentment. These aren't just characters in a story. They're reflections of every choice we make when we think nobody important is watching. Every time we have to decide if our comfort is worth someone else's pain. Every moment we choose who we'll be when being good costs us something we don't want to pay. The question isn't whether you'll face your own moment of truth. You will. The question is what you'll choose when it arrives. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge your assumptions and change how you see the world. Like this video if it made you feel something real. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose differently, that redemption is possible, but only through the hard road of accountability, and that the sound of a cup breaking in the dark can echo forever if we're brave enough to listen. Comment below and tell us, what would you have done? Because until we're honest about that answer, we'll never truly know who we are.